So we're going to read in Joshua chapter 3, we're going to read the first 5 verses this morning. Interesting story. The children of Israel are getting ready to go into the promised land. Moses has died. Joshua's taken over. They're getting ready to go, and we know the story of Jericho. This is just before that. The Bible says in Joshua chapter 3, verse 1, "And Joshua arose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed over. And it came to pass after 3 days that the officers went through the host. And they commanded the people, saying, When ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests the Levites bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place and go after it. Yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go. For ye have not passed this way heretofore. And Joshua said unto the people, Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." This morning I want to talk to you for just a couple of minutes, preparing to cross Jordan. Preparing to cross Jordan. Let's pray. I need the Lord's help, and then we're going to get into the message this morning. So the children of Israel have come to the banks of the Jordan River. And crossing the Jordan River had a lot of significance. It held a lot of, it was the culmination of a lot of things for the children of Israel. It was the end of hundreds of years in captivity in Egypt. And Moses was the man that God chose to lead the children of Israel out of the captivity in Egypt. And crossing the Jordan River and going into the promised land was the end of that and the beginning of a new age for the children of Israel. It was the culmination of 40 years of wilderness wandering, where the children of Israel, we know the story, how God, they could have gone directly to the promised land, and the trip by foot from Egypt to the promised land was really only a couple of weeks. But because of some circumstances, God told them that they had to be in the land, in the wilderness wandering for 40 years. Crossing Jordan was the end of that. And crossing Jordan, more importantly, it was the beginning of conquest, where they would fight the battles and God would give them the victories. They would take the land that God had promised them. And it was the beginning of entering into the blessings that God had for them. So crossing the Jordan River, it held a lot of significance. It was the culmination of some things, of hundreds of years of preparation, and it was the catapulting into the blessing of God. Israel was quite literally hundreds of feet away from entering into the promised land, the land that they had waited for hundreds of years for. But first, they had to cross Jordan. Each and every one of us this morning may be standing at the banks of our own Jordan River. And that Jordan is different for every one of us, and it holds a different significance to each and every one of us. Only you know what your Jordan is. For some of you this morning, it may be your Jordan is that you've never been saved. And this morning, you can't enter into the promised land. You can't enter into God's blessing until you cross that Jordan River of salvation. Or maybe for some of you, you are saved, but you've never followed the Lord in believer's baptism. You've been struggling with it, and it is that obstacle, it's that roadblock, it's that last thing that you need to do before you enter into God's blessing. For some of you, it may be that you haven't surrendered your life to the Lord. You're saved, you're baptized, you go to church, and you can call yourself a Christian, you look the part, but you've never surrendered your life to whatever it is that God has for you. And I remember doing that as a 12-year-old boy at junior camp, and then I did it again as an 18-year-old young man. I had just gone through a couple circumstances in my life that I had put myself in a tough position. And I said, God, I told you I would do whatever you want when I was 12, and I haven't necessarily gone back on that. But I'm telling you again, whatever it is, you ask it, it's done. Because the I realized then and there, I don't know why it took me 18 years, but I realized that the only way that I was going to be happy, and the only way that I was going to live a life that really amounted to anything in light of eternity was doing whatever the Lord asked me to do. I told him, God, so maybe that's you this morning. Maybe your Jordan is you just need to surrender your life to the Lord, whatever it is that he has, whether it's that he wants you to be a plumber or he wants you to be a preacher, an evangelist, an electrician. It doesn't matter. You surrender your life to the Lord, and whatever it is that he asks you to do, you do it. You say, it's done. Maybe that's your Jordan this morning. Maybe it's a besetting sin. Maybe that last obstacle that you have to cross over before you enter into the Lord's blessing and into the Lord's promised land is you have to get rid of. You fill in the blank. You know what it is. And you say, well, I don't want to get rid of fill in the blank. Or that's going to be difficult. Or I don't know if I can. Maybe your Jordan is that you haven't been following the Lord's leading in tithing. God says give 10%, pretty cut and dry. But you haven't been following the Lord and being obedient in that area. And you say, well, I can't. Have you seen the economy? Have you seen how much gas is? I have. My truck was chugging to the gas station the other day because I was delaying the inevitable. And I said, you know what? I'm going to fill my truck up. And my wife should be proud because there's some people who keep their vehicles filled, and whenever they get gas, they fill it up all the way. How many of you do that? Whenever you get gas, you fill it up all the way. How many of you put in just enough to get by because you hate spending money on gas? Okay, I am one of those people. I'm a 20-bucker, and that's it. 20 bucks, that's it. Well, 20 bucks gets you like 2 gallons now. And so I was chugging to the gas station, and I said, I'm going to fill it up. 30.2 gallons later, over $140 it took to fill up my truck. And you say, I can't tithe. I can't give 10% of my gross income to the Lord. I could promise you this. I've seen it 100 times if I've seen it once. God will do more with your 90 than you can do with your 100. 100%. You can write it down and take it to the bank. God blesses tithing. I don't know what it is about it, but there's certain things that the Lord blesses, and the Lord blesses tithing. The Lord blesses His Word. The Lord blesses when we spread the gospel, and the Lord blesses when you honor Him with your finances. So maybe that's your Jordan this morning. You said you've been robbing the Lord in tithes. Maybe it's this that you are a spiritual bum, and you show up to church on Sunday, and you figure that is your service to the Lord. You don't spread the Lord's word. You don't pitch in and do anything for God in the way of service. And maybe your Jordan is the Lord has been saying, you need to get more involved in church. You need to get more involved in witnessing. You need to be actively serving the Lord. Maybe that's your Jordan this morning. I don't know what it is. You know what it is, and that's between you and God. But what I want to help you with this morning is I want to talk about how we cross Jordan. How we cross Jordan. The Bible gives us a blueprint, very plain and simple, on how the Israelites prepared to cross Jordan. That's the title of the message this morning, Preparing to Cross Jordan. Number one, how did the children of Israel prepare to cross Jordan? Number one, they packed up. They packed up. Read the first verse again in Joshua chapter 3, verse 1. And Joshua rose early in the morning, and they removed from Shittim and came to Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and lodged there before they passed. The children of Israel moved to the banks of Jordan. This place where they were lodging was on the map maybe 4, 5, 6 miles away from the banks of the Jordan. And Joshua said, everybody pack up. If we're going to cross Jordan, the first thing we have to do is go to Jordan, right? And I'll tell you this morning, you'll never cross Jordan until you go down to the river. You're never going to cross your Jordan until you pack up and you get ready to cross the river. Now, packing up and moving, it wasn't just like a carry-on suitcase. They didn't have a little roll-away, a carry-on bag. It was a logistical nightmare for the children of Israel to break camp and to move down the Jordan. They've been living in the wilderness for 40 years. Ladies, they had to pack up their house, all of their stuff, their kitchen, their kids, their clothes, their cattle, their servants, everything. So it was a logistical nightmare. And they said, Joshua, we're going to break camp to move 4 or 5 miles. Can't we just stay over here where we're at? And then when we get ready to go, we'll just make the trip all at once so I don't have to pack up twice. And Joshua said, no, we're moving down to the banks of the river. And if you're going to cross your Jordan this morning, number one, you got to pack up. You got to get ready to go. I think about them packing up all their tents and their cattle and all their things. And I'm sure they had done it a million times. I'm sure everybody, a household, had kind of a routine. And they said, all right, son, when we pack up, you take care of this. And these 2 sons, you take care of the tent, and I'll get the cattle, and the ladies will take care of the food for the preparations for the travel. When my wife and I go anywhere, go to church, it's a logistical nightmare. Packing up the 3 kids. you have to make sure that everyone is fed, and then you have to make sure that each of them has an extra change of clothes and a snack and their bubba. And so my heart goes out to the children of Israel. It wasn't an easy thing, but they had to go down. I want to read this, and the quote is right on a crease. I have to open it up. It may not be convenient to cross Jordan, but it is necessary. It may not be convenient. It may not be the easiest thing, but if you're going to move into the blessing of the Lord, it's a necessary thing. Number 2, not only did they pack up, number 2, they looked up. Joshua chapter 3, verse 3, the Bible says, "And they commanded the people, saying, When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests the Levites bearing it, then you shall move from your place and go after it." They were only to cross Jordan following the ark of the covenant. We know that the ark of the covenant represented the presence of God. They were not to cross on their own. You are not going to cross your Jordan, just as the children of Israel weren't going to cross their Jordan, if you don't have the Lord's help. And each household, I can think of this, they didn't know exactly when. Joshua didn't say when, the third morning when the sun comes up, everybody pack up and go. He said whenever you see the ark. So I can think as the men were making preparations to get the cattle packed up and the servants packed up, doing the heavy lifting, and the ladies were preparing food. They didn't know how long the trip was going to be. They were getting the household items packed up, and the kids were doing their chores. I can imagine every household, the dad sat down and said, all right, we need to have, at every point in time, we need to have somebody watching so that when the ark goes by, we don't miss it. Because we need to be ready to go whenever the ark goes. That was their signal to move. And what that signifies for us is if we're going to cross our Jordan, we need to go with the Lord's. But they had to watch and diligently seek to make sure that when the ark was going, they were going. We don't cross Jordan on our terms. We cross Jordan on God's terms. He's the one that's going to get us across. And we have to go when He's ready to go. So are you diligently seeking the Lord? If you want to cross your Jordan for whatever that is or whatever that means, we're going to need the Lord's help. But we have to be seeking His face. And when He's ready to move, we have to be ready to go. So number 1, they packed up. Number 2, they looked up. And number 3, they got up. Have you figured out all the points are going to end in up now? They packed up, they looked up. Number 3, they got up. Joshua chapter 3, verse 3, the end of it. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord and the priests and Levites bearing it, then you shall remove from your place and go after it. That's Joshua saying, you get your rear in gear and you follow the ark. When the ark passed, they got up and followed. Maybe you haven't crossed your Jordan yet because you're not willing to get up and put in the effort. Maybe it's not that you don't know what your Jordan is. Maybe you know what it is that you need to do. And you know that you need God's help in doing it. And you even know what it is that you need to do, but you just simply are not willing to get up and put in the effort to cross. It's not easy. It's not convenient. You say, well, I don't want to pack up. I don't want to have to seek God's face. I'm just not going to put in the effort. I'm comfortable here where I'm at. But if you want to move into God's blessing, you have to pack up. You got to look up, and then you got to get up. You got to go. I've noticed often in my life, and I don't know how the Lord works in your life, but this is how He works in my life. Often, God makes His will very plain to me. I don't think that God hides His will from you and He just puts you here on earth. He gives you a plan, but then He says, good luck, try to find it. Like you do maybe like with kids at VBS where you have the sandbox and you put a couple pennies in there and you say, all right, kids, find the pennies. And they're digging in there. God doesn't say, here's the will for your life. Flips it on the beach, buries it in sand and says, good luck. God often makes His will very plain. And we know what His will is. But I've also noticed in my life that not only does God make His will very plain, but less often, does He make it easy. Often it requires a lot of work. Sometimes it requires going through trials or waiting or sometimes of not knowing how it's going to turn out. So God often makes His way plain, but He doesn't always make it easy. We live in a day and age where we want everything easy, right? We want it all to come right now and with as little effort as possible. If we have to wait at McDonald's for 5 minutes in the drive-thru, we start honking our horns, fussing and complaining because we can't believe that it took them 2 minutes to make a full meal. We're so impatient. We want everything at the touch of a button. No, we can literally buy everything that we would ever need, including a car and a house, online without ever having to go anywhere. But God doesn't operate that way. That may be the way our society operates, but that's not how God operates. And God says you got to get your rear in gear, and you got to be willing to put in the effort. He's willing to help us, but we have to be willing to help Him out and do our part. Following God across Jordan may not be easy, but it's the only way into God's blessing. Number 4, they lined up. They lined up. Joshua chapter 3, verse number 4. Yet there shall be a space between you and it about 2,000 cubits by measure, talking about the distance between them and the Ark of the Covenant. Come not near unto it, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. 2,000 cubits. A cubit is the distance between your elbow to the tip of your middle finger. It's the longest point on there. That is a cubit. A span in the Bible days was the span of a man's hand. The about average measure of a span is 9.5 inches. My span is exactly 8 inches. And I have a little bit smaller hand. I have thick hands, but small hands. And that's come in handy a lot of times when I'm measuring stuff out. Dad says, well, how big is that window, or how big is that? It's almost pert near 24. That's like 21.5. Perfect 8. So a span is 9.5 inches. And a cubit was 19.5 inches about. That was an average. I measured mine the other day when I was putting this message together, 17.5. So again, a little bit shorter arm that goes with a little bit shorter body. But if you do the math, 2,000 cubits was about 0.6 miles. So about a little over half a mile. God says when you line up and you're following the ark, give yourself about a half mile distance. That way you can see where the ark is going, because you've never been here before. I have. I know where you're going. You don't know where you're going, so you follow me, and you give yourself a little leeway so you know and you follow. God will never send you to do His will, but He'll always lead you to do His will. God never says, here's what I want you to do. Good luck. Have a good trip. See you next fall. Hope you find your dad. God will always lead you to do His will. It reminds me of a boy. His dad told him to go outside to pick up his football that he left in the yard. And it was dark. It had been night, and he said, son, you go out and pick up your football. He said, but Dad, it's dark. I'm scared of the dark. His dad said, doesn't matter. The dude's going to wreck your football. You go get your football. He said, Dad, but it's dark. I'm scared of the dark. So his dad saw a little bit of a learning opportunity, so he got down on his knee and he said, son, Jesus is with you everywhere you go. Jesus is in your heart. Jesus is with you no matter where you're at. Jesus is in the light. Jesus is in the dark. Jesus is on every continent. Jesus is everywhere. So Jesus will be with you. If you're scared of the dark, you can still go out. Jesus will be with you. So his son walked to the door. He looked outside, and Dad said, remember, Jesus is out there. He paused and hesitated. He looked back. He said, Dad, Jesus is out there? His dad said, yes, son, Jesus is out there. So the boy poked his head out the door. He said, hey, Jesus, if you're out there, will you grab my football? And then went back inside. God will never send you to go. He will always lead you. But here's the question. God was willing to lead Israel, but they had to be willing to follow. They had to be willing to get up and to go. God said, Ark will be ready to go. The Levites will be carrying it. You'll be following. You'll know exactly where to go, but they still had to pack up. They still had to be willing to go and follow. Are you willing to follow the Lord across your Jordan? God will be there, but are you willing to follow Him? Number 5, they cleaned up. Joshua chapter 3, verse 5. And Joshua said unto the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. To sanctify simply means to set apart for God's use. Set apart for God's use. When I was in first grade, we attended North Star Christian Academy up in the UP. And if you've ever been to their property, the back side of the building, there is a 2-track. It's gravel now. It used to be just sand. And it was one of those 2 tracks that was very deep where the tires went, probably at least a foot. It was really dug in. If you drove a shorter vehicle, you'd scrape the bottom in the center. So one spring, that two-track always had water in it, but one spring it was literally like a river. It was coming down off of the hill. It was running down that two-track, and at the bottom was literally an elementary school's heaven. Just a big mud pit. Not like, oh, there was some muddy area, like knee-deep on little kids' mud that we would go out and play in. And we would go and we'd stand on the edge and we'd play and throw mud pies and different things like that. But one day we went all in and we played beavers. And we decided on one day it was raining. We played beavers with, I played beaver twice in my life and it never worked good either way. One time with my brother a few years later, Curtis and I were standing up these decent-sized logs. We were putting them standing up in the yard, and then one of us would pretend to chew it down, and then we'd let it fall. So we had one in particular, it had a split at the end, and it was a dead stick that was pretty sharp. So we chewed down the tree, we yelled timber, and it stuck right into Ethan's head, and the blood was squirting out of it. They took him to the hospital and put a couple staples in it. We yelled timber. We told Mom, we yelled timber. He didn't move. It's not our fault. We just have to keep chewing down our trees. So this other particular time where we were playing beaver, we decided to dam up the water to see how deep we could get it. And, I mean, we had at least in my elementary first grade mind, it was super deep. And we would not just stand on the outside of it. By last break, we were actually getting into the water and just, head to toe muck, like a mud roll. So the teacher, little Chilean lady, Mrs. Teed, she was my ride to and from to school. And they had one of the classic Astro vans that had like the shutters on it and everything. Like it was. So I went to go get in and she said, "You cannot ride in my van." And so she went and got a trash bag and laid it out on, and she had a trash bag for me to get in and then a trash bag to sit on the seat. And I remember looking at myself thinking, what does it matter? Like, I'm not that dirty. It dried. It's crusty. It's not going to get on anything. But too often, as Christians, we look at ourselves and we think, what does it matter? I'm not that dirty. Joshua said, sanctify yourselves. When we compare our cleanliness or our spirituality to the rest of the world, we look pretty good. Because right now, the spirituality and the rest of the world is pretty not good. So we can look pretty squeaky clean and say, according to I'm a pretty good Christian. But when we compare ourselves to God, we're nowhere near. All fall short. And when we use Christ as the standard, we're as dirty as that first grade Drew, full of mud, head to toe, have to sit on the garbage bag. And God says, I can't use that. Joshua said, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. But first they had to clean up. And then lastly, I want us to see, not only did they pack up, line up, look up, clean up, or get up and line up and clean up, but lastly, God filled them up. God filled them up with blessings. But first they had to be willing to do it. I'll tell you this right now, God will always come through on His end. If there's ever a hitch in the plan, it was never on God's end. It will always be on our end. But we have to be willing to do our part. Joshua 3:5, that last part of the verse says, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among us. That meant that they were going to have victory over their enemies. That meant that they were going to have a successful crossing. That meant they were going to live in the promised land. The walls of Jericho were going to fall down. Everything that God had promised was going to fall into place. But first they had to clean up. What is it in your life that you have to clean up? I know what it is in my life. There's a couple of things that I look at and I think, man, I need to take care of that. And you know how it is. We're all flesh and blood. The same. You trip up on the same thing that you've tripped up on 100 times, and you think, when am I going to stop this? I need the Lord's help. You're going to clean up. When Israel had prepared, then God delivered. God will always come through on His end. If you're at the banks of your Jordan today, I don't know what that is. Only you and God know. But you're ready to cross, and you say, you know what, today is going to be the beginning of that crossing for me. I'm ready to cross Jordan. I'm ready to get saved. I'm ready to be baptized. I'm ready to surrender my life to the Lord. I'm ready to be obedient in the things that God has asked me to do. pack up, get down to the river. Be ready to look up, to get up, to clean up, and then God will fill you up with blessing.